And welcome to the Bible Investigation Open Case Bible Study. And I am your investigator, Azariah. And what we're going to do is this is my reaction to a video that I discovered. And I did a preview of the video. And this is one of the videos that I feel that didn't get a lot of credit. And I believe that this video came out probably like late 2000 or the 2000. I mean, not late 2000, but the late 90s or probably like the early 2000. And this is um, a video on Joseph and his multicolored coat that his father gave him. So we're gonna go ahead and happy Sabbath. The day is December the 2nd, 2023, and we're gonna go ahead and take a look at this video and criticize it and stuff like that. But what we're trying to gather is education of see the link of the Bible. So that being said, let's go ahead and get it popping. And I do apologize. And this is the Bible Investigation Open Case Bible Study. Let's go ahead.
The story of Joseph and his multicolored coat has captured people's hearts for generations. It's even been turned into one of the world's most famous stage shows. His story begins when he loses that coat to jealous brothers who sell him into slavery. In Egypt, he interprets the dreams of Pharaoh and is promoted to prime minister. It's a wonderful story, but surely not a piece of history. Can Egyptology shed light on Joseph and the garment that started all the trouble? Joseph's adventures were written down by scribes in about 600 BC, over 1,000 years after the story was set. No record exists as to who wrote the tale or where they got their information. So debate has raged for centuries about whether it's pure fiction or a description of a real man's life. According to Alan Lloyd, professor of Egyptology at Swansea University, the truth might lie somewhere in between.
One can see over and over again in other historical traditions that you can have a situation where there is a core of an accurate historical narrative, but a great deal has in fact been bolted on.
So what is the evidence? The story starts in Canaan, modern-day Palestine, Syria, and Israel, before the time of Moses, around 1600 to 1700 BC. It's told in the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah, and they all say Joseph was one of 12 sons of Jacob, a wealthy nomad. A central thread running through the whole story is the rivalry between the brothers. According to Dr. Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones, a specialist in family life, this sibling rivalry was strong because nomad chiefs in those times had more than one wife.
Each wife wants their son to become the next leader, to be the next chief of the tribe or the next king in some cases. And this is certainly inherent within the story of Joseph, where we see rivalries set up between the brothers from a very early age. Joseph, we must remember, and then Benjamin after him, is the son of a second wife. The other brothers are all sons of other wives. So there is this rivalry that seems to go on there.
But the object that ignited this rivalry more than anything was the coat given to Joseph by his father, Jacob. It's been portrayed as a garment of great elegance, awash with colour, the stuff of legend. But perhaps it's not so far-fetched. A visit to any Middle or Near Eastern market or bazaar will show that vivid colours have been an important part of this culture for centuries.
You can come to virtually any Middle Eastern town or city and find a workshop like this, where fabrics are being made in exactly the same way as reported in a text or in wall paintings or in other visual media in antiquity. Today, in the modern Muslim or Arab world, there is a great emphasis still on colourful textiles and gift-giving of textiles too.
Yet to the modern imagination, trying to picture the ancient world, a life in colour is not what comes to mind.
I think that we tend to envisage the ancient world in monochrome, maybe because of our over-dependence on Greek and Roman statues. I think we have to put that out of our mind and remember that the ancient world, and again the Near East in particular, was a riot of colour.
But most examples of colour in the ancient world only go back to 500 BC. The Joseph story is set 1,000 years earlier. To find evidence of colour dating back to that time, we need to go deep into the Egyptian desert. The remote tombs of Beni Hassan were built in 1800 BC.
Wow.
And according to Barry Gitlin, a professor of ancient history, they give us a unique glimpse into Joseph's era.
We're here in the 12th dynasty tomb of Numhotep III. Fantastic scene that I've lectured in my classes about for years.
Numhotep was a high official of the pharaoh Amenemhat I. Depicted on the wall are various scenes from his life. Some are people he lived and worked with, but there's one scene of a group of travelers with a very different appearance.
There are two main kinds of garb, both of which are striped. And each stripe being a separate color is very interesting. Plus, you see that there are designs within the stripes, which also adds to the differentness, the beauty, the importance of the garment. And as such, both represent the kind of garment that a character like Joseph could have been interpreted by the writers of the Bible as having worn.
Although these are images of multicolored coats in an Egyptian setting, there are signs that these travelers in fact come from Canaan, Joseph's homeland. All art of the period shows Egyptians as clean-shaven, whereas Canaanites are always seen with beards.
You look at these characters coming in, you just look at the beards, at the faces, and this is the common representation of the Semitic Canaanites coming in.
The markets of the modern-day Middle East and the tombs of Egypt suggest that Joseph did have a multicolored coat, but the evidence doesn't explain why his brothers acted the way they did. There must have been something else about that coat that generated such envy. One reason why can be found in the translation of the Hebrew word for coat in the Old Testament.
Now, when we go back to the Hebrew, as recounted in the book of Genesis, we seem to have an indication that the garment is a special garment. The word that's used to describe it is only found once more in the Old Testament, and that's in the first book of Samuel, where it's actually referred to as a long-sleeved garment. And of course, long sleeves make something quite impractical to work in, so it's a sign of status if you can have long sleeves on your garment.
But it wasn't just the long sleeves that marked out status. Great prestige would be attached to the choice of colors in the coat. In the ancient world, color was a precious commodity.
Well, today we've got a myriad of colours that we can choose from, and they're all basically, since the 19th century, made from chemical dyes, which mean that they're solid, they don't run at all, we don't really, on the whole, lose colour in the wash. But of course, in antiquity, it was a completely different matter, because every kind of dye stuff that we had to come from natural commodities.
Indeed, some colours were harder to achieve than others. Blacks were difficult as textiles had to be saturated with dye to stop them turning grey. Whites required bleaching, a very complex process. But by far the most expensive dyes were reds and purples, colours worn by the Semite travellers in the tomb paintings.
Red has to come from something like the stamen of the crocus flower, and of course a tiny crocus only gives 3 or 4 stamen, so you need thousands of these things to create a solid colour red. But without any doubt at all, the most important colour that you could find in antiquity was a purple, a deep, what we can call today imperial purple. A good, true purple has to come from harvesting the sea. It's created by picking up tiny shellfish, mollusks, and it takes thousands and thousands of these things, which are dumped into a vat of boiling water, which ingeniously the ancients discovered gives off a rich purple dye when wool or linen is dipped into it.
To be given a coat made of purples and reds would have sent a very clear message to Joseph's brothers. Joseph was Jacob's favourite. It's no surprise then that this drove Joseph's brothers to get rid of him. According to the story, Joseph is sold to travelling merchants, but we only have the Bible's word for it. The Bible does, however, slip in an authentic detail. Joseph is sold for 20 shekels. Egyptian documents reveal that this is precisely the price you would expect.
A few hundred years later, we find that the price is up to 30 shekels. And yet, down into the first millennium, it's up to 50 shekels, and so on. So we see, you can actually plot on a chart and see the cost of slaves going up. Now, with the Joseph story, this is an important detail, because if the story is simply conjured up, made up, if it's just a novel from the end of Israelite and Judean history, you would expect that the author would not know what the price was 500, 600, 700 years before.
While Joseph is being hauled away to Egypt, his brothers smear his coat with goat's blood to fake his death. We're told that Joseph is sold as a slave to Potiphar, the chief of Pharaoh's army, a man in charge of soldiers, horses, chariots. He's rich and powerful with a large house and staff. No mention of Potiphar has ever been found in ancient documents. But the Brooklyn papyrus found near Luxor dates back to Joseph's time and proves that the use of Semitic servants was surprisingly common.
During the late Middle Kingdom, which is a period when Joseph may well have come to Egypt, a well-to-do household of a nobleman in Egypt had a good number of Semitic household servants, people who did work in the fields, people who did the weaving, and so on. So a well-to-do estate would have household servants. We might even use the term slave to describe these people.
According to the story, Joseph was given an Egyptian name, another custom confirmed by the Brooklyn papyrus.
Their master may have had a hard time vocalizing their foreign name, and so we have the name X, who is called Y. Now, X being the Semitic name, who is called Y, his Egyptian name. In the Joseph story, we have Joseph, who is called Zaphanach Paneach.
The Bible says Joseph worked hard and did well, rising to take charge of Potiphar's household. But then his fate takes a dangerous turning, instigated by Potiphar's wife. She makes a pass at him. The incident may well be fictional, an attempt by the author of the story to paint Joseph as the innocent party. But according to Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones, the episode can't be ruled out altogether.
When it comes to women in antiquity, and certainly when compared to their Hebrew or Semite sisters, elite women in ancient Egypt have a remarkably autonomous life. They have a considerable amount of freedom. We know, for example, that they could divorce at will, that they had the right to their own property. We find this legal status to be really quite remarkable for a woman's lot in antiquity.
Joseph rejects her advances. Furious, she accuses him of trying to rape her. Joseph is thrown into jail. But just when his life could sink no further, it takes another dramatic twist. In jail, a former royal servant asks Joseph if he can interpret a strange dream about pressing 3 bunches of grapes into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph predicts the servant will be freed in 3 days. His interpretation proves true. The news reaches Pharaoh, who orders Joseph to be freed in order to have his own dreams interpreted. There is no way of checking whether Joseph was released from jail or even thrown into jail in the first place. Indeed, some biblical scholars suspect the whole episode is making a religious point.
If one looks at the way that the Joseph story operates, what one has is a series of deliverances of Joseph himself from captivity, and he is delivered from imprisonment. We're told quite explicitly in the narrative, because he has the favor of God.
But that's not to say that Joseph wasn't a gifted interpreter of dreams, and that somehow he came to the attention of Pharaoh. Artifacts found in ancient Egyptian tombs do in fact suggest that the Egyptians took dreams, specifically nightmares, seriously. Kasia Szpakowska is an Egyptologist who has studied the significance of sleep and dreams in ancient Egypt.
Well, one of these objects, this one, is the top of a headrest. Today we have fluffy pillows that we use to sleep on, but in Egypt, a hot climate with lots of little bugs that walk around on the ground, you want to raise your head up higher. And this is the portion that your head would actually be on. Some of them have on either the underside here that supports the head, or on the pillar itself, or on top of the base. They have figurines and carved in figures of various types of creatures holding knives, spears, snakes even, that would be used to magically repel things like nightmares that might come and attack you during the night when you're at your most vulnerable.
Clearly, dreams were of interest in ancient Egyptian culture, but the biblical record is quite specific. A Hebrew interpreted the dreams of an Egyptian pharaoh in about the 17th century BC. And this presents a problem.
For the first 2,000 years of Egypt's history, we really don't have any evidence for dream interpretation. It's not until about the 1300 BC, roughly, that we have the first book of dreams and their possible interpretations. But we're not even sure if it was used.
However, there are clues that Joseph may have learned about interpreting dreams from his family. Joseph was from Canaan, modern-day Syria. All his ancestors came from Mesopotamia, just to the north. Dream interpretation was part of ancient Mesopotamian culture. It's found in the story of a leader called Gudea.
In at least about 2400 BC, we have stories of Gudea, which describe him having a dream and him needing to have this dream interpreted by a third party. When it's described, it's not described as something unusual as Gudea having to go to a foreigner or go to a foreign land, so it's considered as part of that culture.
The Bible says that Pharaoh asks Joseph to interpret a dream in which 7 fat cows come out of the Nile, followed by 7 thin cows. Joseph says the dream means 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. In the Bible account, the prediction comes true. And on the strength of it, Joseph is made Prime Minister of Egypt. It almost sounds too convenient. A dream that accurately predicts a major crisis. But psychologists believe there's an authentic ring to parts of the story.
I'm gonna pause right here. Only thing I just want to say is the depiction of Joseph is correct. I would say, my opinion, speculating. But however, for for the Egyptians, I feel they should be a little bit darker. I would say like Grace Jones darker. Um, I feel some. I would just say some depiction of the Egyptians is right, but I feel that some of them should be a little bit darker. That's all. That's all the criticism I got to say. But yeah, what's your opinion? All right.
This has to be far around your head goes. This one.
Mark Blagrove is testing the theory that dreams are more than just random images or even an activity that processes memories. His research strongly suggests that people dream mostly what they are worried about.
Are there any people?
Student Katie Jones has volunteered to have her dreams analysed. Earlier, she revealed that her biggest worry is the stress of her new part-time job in a hardware store.
No.
These worries are hardly on the scale of those of a pharaoh, but if Mark Blagrove's theory is right, then even Katie's dreams should mirror her concerns, however trivial.
We could say that, humans back then are going to have a similar relationship to their dreams as we have now.
And those are your brainwaves just there, which are very awake.
I feel if they could get really, I feel they could get good results. Go ahead and get a black person going through crap and let's see what they dream about. You believe me, they would get absolutely good results from a black person. That's my speculation. That's all. Let's go ahead and continue.
Wake brainwaves because they're very bitty. So over the night, that will get smaller when you're in non-REM sleep, and when you go into REM sleep, it'll disappear.
Dreaming is identified by a type of sleep called REM, short for rapid eye movement. The sensors on Katie's head are linked to a computer that will tell researchers when she starts having REM sleep. Asking Katie the morning after what she dreamt about would only reveal a fraction of her dreams. Most of us forget 80% of them. So Katie will have to be woken up at 90-minute intervals when she falls into deep sleep.
Right. She's been like this for a few minutes now. She's got these sorts of waves, which are called sawtooth waves. And that usually happens when you're going into REM.
These brainwaves indicated it was time to ask her about her dream.
Why I feel like I'm watching a Nightmares on Elm Street, because this happened in that movie. But anyways, I'm just saying it's just why he whispering, and I thought he was in a separate room from her. But anyways, let's go ahead and continue.
Hi, Katie. Was anything going through your mind at that moment?
I was in work and I was stacking shelves.
Ah, right, and what was stacking shelves,
Yeah,
right.
but they were really like strange things I was stacking. So I was
Right.
sort of like, it was just really weird things like green and red caps and stuff, and
Yeah.
I was making them into shapes and stuff.
On each occasion she was woken up, her dreams were recorded.
It's like a big bunch of us were all going
As the night progressed, a clear pattern emerged.
out. Another dream.
Time and again, Katie's dreams related to her part-time job.
She was dreaming repeatedly about being at work, either getting a different job at a newsagent or arguing with a customer and the customer reporting her for it. So the interesting thing about the night is that we seem to have more dreams when we're under stress, but the content seems to be related to the things that are concerning us.
Mark Blakegrove's findings are in line with studies that show the powerful effects of stress on the dreaming mind.
There's even experiments being done on depriving people of water for half the day so that they go to bed thirsty, and finding that they're then more likely to dream about drinking.
The Bible says, of course, that Pharaoh was dreaming of weightier issues, a famine to be precise. Remarkably, there are signs that the threat of famine would have plagued the mind of Pharaoh in Joseph's time. Fekri Hassan is an Egyptologist who's researched why the civilization that created the pyramids some 500 years before Joseph was born was wiped out within decades. He concludes that it was famine, and his evidence lies in a little-known tomb in southern Egypt.
The tomb of Ankh-Tifi, who was a governor of a district in Upper Egypt, is a very, very significant tomb because it contains this unique record of the famine. The writing is on the wall, literally. The character is there, and he speaks in a very concise, clear manner on a series of events, low floods, about famines, about people leaving their homes and fleeing in every which direction.
Famine was a constant threat to the ancient world, but this event eclipsed all others. Its effects were so extreme that it led people to commit unthinkable acts.
All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger to such a degree that everyone had come to eating their children.
It brought not just mass starvation, but total collapse of the social order.
We have evidence that they attacked the pyramids and they attacked the tombs. Evidence that they attacked temples, they attacked royal institutions, they attacked mansions of the nobles. We have evidence that the ladies who were very highly esteemed by the noblemen went to the streets in search of food. A total reversal in the social order, because the poor then were able to gain wealth by looting, while the wealthy were reduced to poverty.
The ruling pharaoh would have been blamed for the disaster, spelling the end of his reign and his dynasty. Any future king, even centuries later, would have famine on his mind and in his nightmares.
If your major concern in life is whether or not there's going to be a famine and whether or not there's going to be enough food around, then we can quite easily imagine that people are going to be dreaming of that type of thing, and either dreaming of it literally or dreaming of it in some metaphorical way.
With the trauma of past famines weighing on the minds of Pharaoh and probably all Egyptians, perhaps Joseph's interpretation is not so surprising. What is surprising is the Bible's claim that on the strength of this gift, Pharaoh promotes Joseph to Prime Minister of Egypt. Of all the twists and turns of the story, this seems the least likely. And yet, archaeological finds are consistent with the Bible's claim. these finds is in a New Kingdom tomb in Amarna, Middle Egypt. When the Bible describes Joseph's promotion, it gives away some telling details. As a sign of authority, Pharaoh gave Joseph his signet ring and placed a gold chain around his neck. According to Barry Gitlin, these details can be checked against evidence of pharaonic protocol. The owner of this tomb was a man called Ai, who lived in 1450 BC, 200 years after Joseph. Ancient documents tell us a pharaoh promoted him into high office, and wall paintings inside describe his investiture.
What we have in front of us is Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti, according to some, looking out of a window from their couch or bed, and it allows us to look in on part of the activity of an Egyptian king as he bestows something upon the character of Ai in front of the pharaoh, in front of King Akhenaten.
And it's the detail of what exactly the king and queen are bestowing that strikes a chord with the Joseph story.
This is very similar to what happens in the book of Genesis, where you have the character of Joseph being raised to a high office by the king of Egypt. And as part of that investiture of high office, the king gives to him some sort of gold chain, fancy garments, and his insignia, his signet ring. So here we have some evidence that whoever wrote the story must have had some firsthand knowledge of royal practice within the Egyptian government.
The details of Joseph's investiture might add up, but no mention has ever been found of a prime minister with his name. Indeed, the whole idea of a foreigner reaching the top of Egyptian society sounds far-fetched. But there is in fact a substantial body of archaeology that shows that Canaanites like Joseph did achieve high office in Egypt.
There was no problem in people from Syria, Palestine, or indeed anywhere else outside Egypt becoming extremely successful and reaching very high rank, provided they were prepared, as Joseph is represented as being, to take on Egyptian ways.
In the 1980s in Saqqara near Cairo, archaeologists found the tomb of a former prime minister of ancient Egypt called Apa-El. His name, Apa-El, is highly significant. The word El was the Canaanite term for God.
The name Apa-El, of course, is not an Egyptian name, it's a Semitic name. And this man was the vizier, he was the prime minister of Lower Egypt, northern Egypt, during the days of Pharaoh Akhenaten. So here we have a Semite who achieved a very high position in the administration under Pharaoh Akhenaten.
Clearly, pharaohs did occasionally appoint Semite prime ministers. But all the evidence of this is from the New Kingdom, some 300 years after Joseph's death. There's no proof that it ever happened in the Middle Kingdom, Joseph's time. But some historians are chasing other leads. Joseph was appointed prime minister on the strength of his predictions of famine. Evidence of Middle Kingdom famines and measures to deal with them would support the biblical account. A newly discovered stela, a stone tablet, does indeed recount a spate of Middle Kingdom famines.
This is an interesting stela. We see the governor, and in front of him, statements of various events of his life. One of them is a mention of a famine, and it indicates to us that famines were quite frequent. The mention of famines is not haphazard. It's mentioned in certain episodes, and almost invariably we can correlate those famines with global climatic changes.
Confirmation of these Middle Kingdom famines has recently been found to the south of Egypt, in snow and ice at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. Lonnie Thompson and his team of geologists climb from the jungle to beyond the snow line to drill for ice cores. And these ice cores can tell us about Egypt's climate history.
Kilimanjaro is, let's say it's the only site that you can get an ice core record that would record events in this part of the world. But it's also very relevant to the history of Egypt because the headwaters of the Nile depend on rain, and the accumulation on this ice field on Kilimanjaro depends on snow, all coming from the same events. So they are very closely linked, and you should see a record of that in these ice cores.
In the lab, the scientists examine the ice core for the presence and quantity of dust. Dust is a fingerprint of major climate change because its presence suggests an ancient catastrophe. A volcanic eruption, or even a meteor strike. Such an event would throw massive quantities of dust into the atmosphere, disrupting weather patterns and rainfall, causing drought and ultimately famine.
Well, these are sections of the Kilimanjaro ice core. They're from about 40 meters below the surface. And this is the older piece that we see here. And we see this very distinct dust event. This represents 4,200 years ago. It's a 300-year drought in the Egyptian history.
This is not the famine Joseph predicted, but the cataclysmic famine that led to the cannibalism discussed in Ankh-Khetefi's tomb 500 years before Joseph's time. By contrast, the evidence for Joseph's famine should appear higher up the core as a smaller scatter of dust particles.
As you come up in the core, you can see that it's a very clean core up until very top here. You can see these very small particles, dust clumps of this event about 3,600 years ago.
The clusters of dust correspond with the eruption in 1644 BC of the Thera volcano in the Aegean Sea, just 500 miles north of Egypt. Now, the Bible, of course, is quite specific that the famine lasts 7 years. This 7-year cycle also rings true. It fits with the climate phenomenon known as El Niño, which has often caused famine, always in 7-year cycles.
We have one of these events that occurred between 1790 and 1797. Very large drought through India. In 1792, in north central India, 600,000 people starved to death. And at the same time that you have the drought in India, you have very low water levels in the Nile River. And it lasted for 7 years.
The Bible also claims that as vizier, Joseph took measures to deal with the famine. Since famine is often caused by drought, one important task would have been to ensure that water continued to reach agricultural areas. The breadbasket for much of Egypt now and in the past is the fertile land around Lake Karun to the west of the country.
Here we are in the middle of Lake Karun in the Fayum Depression. On the east side of the lake, you have the verdant agriculture, palm trees, and all sorts of other greenery. On the other hand, to the west, you have vast, empty stretch of desert. So that you can take a look at this lake as the dividing point between agriculture and life, and desert and death.
In very ancient times, the lake was fed by water from a branch of the Nile. But the Old Kingdom drought that devastated Egypt caused this branch to dry up, turning the lake to dust. So, to avert another crippling famine, a Middle Kingdom official came up with an ingenious plan to keep the link between the lake and the Nile permanently open.
The Egyptian government decided to dredge one of these branches and make it deeper and keep it free from silt, and essentially make it a functioning canal.
The project was so successful that the canal is still in use today.
That work project must have taken thousands of men. We don't know how many people, we don't know how many hours, days, weeks, months, years, but it kept this branch of the Nile clear, and it enabled this area, the area around Fayum, to maintain its fertility.
This construction project would have been essential in stopping future famines. Best estimates indicate that it was built between 1850 and 1650 BC. That's the right time for Joseph's era. Unfortunately, there's no record of who built the canal, but for thousands of years, it has only been known by one name. In Arabic, it's the Bawa Yusuf, which translated into English is the waterway of Joseph. During a famine, Joseph would have made other key decisions to protect Egypt and save his pharaoh's skin. A man who steers his people and his king through great adversity might expect a big reward. The Bible claims that Joseph asks Pharaoh if his family can settle in Egypt. Pharaoh allows Joseph and his brothers to live in a city called Pi-Ramesses in the Nile Delta in the north. But archaeologists surveying the area could find no trace of the city. Then one day in the 1970s, a farmer found the first remarkable clue: the remains of a colossal statue. Archaeologists are convinced this was the site of the city mentioned in the Bible.
Ramses the Great, Ramses II, was one of the most important kings of the New Kingdom. This is the area of Pi-Ramesse, his capital. It was a huge city in this time. We have here the statue, and we know we have a temple over there and several other temples and villas.
The find raised hopes that this was where Joseph had settled and was reunited with his brothers. But these hopes were dashed when archaeologists established that Pi-Ramesses was built 300 years after Joseph's time. Worse still, there was no sign of a Semitic presence at all. But inscriptions were then discovered, suggesting that Pi-Ramesses was built on top of an older city called Avaris. If they could find it, then maybe they could find Joseph.
We know from ancient sources that Avaris must be located in the south of Pi-Ramesse, of the former capital of Ramses. So the excavators who were searching for Avaris, they started in the south, and they finally discovered it and could attach the name Avaris to the things we were excavating.
Now, excavations are gradually revealing the secrets of Avaris. It was built 300 years before Pi-Ramesses, just when Joseph was thought to have lived, and its ruins reveal tantalizing clues to a Semitic presence. Although most of the buildings were Egyptian in style, one area was distinctly Canaanite. But the most compelling evidence of a Semitic presence came from inside the houses. These bodies were found buried in sideways postures, a typically Canaanite tradition. And objects found inside the burial pits left archaeologists in no doubt.
We have a lot of Canaanite shapes like the jugs here, combined with Egyptian shapes like the small vessel here. We find sometimes weapons attached to the tombs, like this sword. It's made of bronze. And then with the same tomb comes a belt in very fragile condition, which the male burial had around his hip. So we have always the mixture of both cultures.
These finds are consistent with the Bible's claim that Semites settled in the Nile Delta, but only poor Semites, perhaps slaves. None of it indicated that someone of Joseph's status, a high-ranking pharaonic official of Semitic origin, had lived there. But further finds at Avaris suggest that archaeologists are closing in on that elusive evidence. The excavations have since been returned to agricultural use, but not before extensive plans and photographic records were made. David Roll, a specialist in biblical and ancient history, examined, then reconstructed part of the site.
In this field, they found a very special monument. This is what's left of it. It's actually the floor of a palace. It's not a huge palace, it's not a royal palace, but it's a very, very high-quality villa of some high official. Reconstructed, you can see how complex it is. There are various elements to it built at different times. The main part here, the audience chamber and main bedroom, is fronted by a 12-columned portico. Then later on was added this twin suite, if you like, of rooms with another portico in front, which enclosed then this courtyard.
This small palace looked like the home of a high-ranking official. But it was a find at the back of the palace that most intrigued archaeologists. A tomb topped with a pyramid.
The tomb was over there, to the south of the palace. And one of the most interesting tombs was that of a dignitary with a tomb chapel. And inside this tomb chapel, we found the rest of a tomb statue.
The statue had been vandalized, but when reassembled, it shocked the experts. This could not have been the statue of an Egyptian official.
When we get it back to the museum and restore it, it looks like this. And you can see that the head's been completely smashed, the lower part of the head, and the eyes have been gouged out. The most important thing is this. It's an amazing haircut. We don't see anything like that in Egypt before this time. And the hair colour is bright red. This guy had flame red hair.
The other details were typical of Semitic people.
Another little detail is the skin colour. Here we can see the forehead. And this here is yellow skin. And that's typical of what the Egyptians did to represent foreigners from the north, people with pale skin.
It wasn't just on the hair and face that paint was found. Flakes of red and black paint were found on the outline of a garment, and with it, a distinctive pattern. With these statue fragments, David Roll began to put together an artist's impression of what the figure may have looked like. Could this be Joseph? The absence of a nameplate means there's no way of knowing, but for David Roll, there are no other contenders.
We have no other example of something quite as extraordinary as this. We have no pyramid tomb for an official of state. We have no other palace for a private individual. These sort of things are things reserved for royalty, usually. So this is extraordinary. We have no other examples to compare it to. But if you're trying to imagine the rewards of somebody who gave such service to Egypt, who saved it from the famine, you would expect these type of things to be given.
Joseph's remarkable tale is, of course, but the curtain raiser to an even more dramatic story. Moses and the Exodus. But there is, in the story of the flight of the Hebrews from Egypt, one final clue to the identity of this mysterious statue. Most Egyptian tombs were stripped of treasures, furniture, clothes, and jewelry. This tomb was no exception. But in this case, the bones were also taken away.
If a plunderer had gone in there to wreck the tomb, he would have left the bones behind. He wouldn't have taken the bones away. Bones don't have any intrinsic value. So somebody's removed the body from this tomb. Now, the story of Joseph is at the time of Exodus, when Moses takes the Israelites out of Egypt, he takes the coffin of Joseph with him. So he would have left an empty tomb. So here we have a guy with a multicolored coat with an empty tomb. It's got to be Joseph.
And that will include the video, our video reaction to Joseph with the multicolored coat, which is, Joseph, which his father is Jacob. That's the one who made the coat. But anyway, I hope y'all enjoy that. For more information, if you want to know more about Joseph, for his reading material, you can read Genesis 30. Chapter 30 through 49, you'll find more information in the details. Sometimes it's easy for us to watch a video, but when you read the story yourself, precept upon precept, line upon line, it's just say, you get more information and more details, and also your memory when you read it for yourself. It's like you can retain that information within yourself. It's hard when you're watching getting information from somebody else, via video or listen to the people speak, but it's easy for us to retain the information of what we read. So again, if you want to, read the material of learning about Joseph, is Genesis chapter 30 through chapter 49. And I hope y'all gain something from this video. I know I have. And I just want to say, y'all be blessed, be easy, and y'all have a safe day or happy Sabbath, whatsoever. I'm sorry, I'm not good with the endings and stuff. But anyway, y'all be blessed and be easy.